Seriously, the dude's two most famous roles, he's playing a guy from Boston with that accent. How is the entire world not calling this movie The Martian? Why am I alone in this?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
The Martian. Ridley Scott is responsible for some of the most iconic movies of the last 40 years, and yet, for the last 15 years or so, he hasn't made much to get the attention of the Academy. While his movies haven't been all bad over that time frame, to me, he's made a string of movies that are almost very good, but just aren't quite there. And a few that aren't even almost good. And yet, we can't write him off because he's Ridley Scott. We know what he can do. The fact is, the film world is better off when Ridley Scott is making good movies. And with The Martian, Ridley Scott is back to making good movies. The movie opens with astronauts doing soil tests on Mars' surface as part of the Ares 3 mission. A sudden severe dust storm forces the crew to abandon their mission 12 days early. But while they're retreating to the MAV, astronaut Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon, gets struck by debris and is presumed dead. But that Mark Watney is a resilient SOB, and it turns out he survived the dust storm. And so, he finds himself alone on a planet with limited food and 4 years until NASA can send a rescue. And no way to contact NASA to tell them he's alive. Meanwhile, through the magic of satellite images, NASA notices that the Mars rover has been moving around, meaning Mark Watney has been doing a lot more driving than dead guys normally do. Using their highly scientific brains, they conclude he must still be alive. Both NASA and Watney then must work against the clock to make contact with the other, to keep Watney alive, and to figure out how to get him home. It's worth noting that several Best Picture nominees this year deal with characters in isolation, whether it be physical, metaphorical, or both. Mark Watney in The Martian is the clearest manifestation of that theme, and yet isolation isn't really a theme explored in The Martian. Watney doesn't have time to sit around and contemplate his predicament or lament his life on Earth, like, say, Tom Hanks in Castaway. He's just focused on how to survive long enough to get out of his predicament. Instead of being existential and about isolation, the movie is, more than anything else, high-stakes problem-solving. Watney must use his ingenuity to solve seemingly insurmountable problem after seemingly insurmountable problem after seemingly insurmountable problem. I think there's something cathartic about that. Though I admit I may be slightly more inclined to enjoy watching Matt Damon do science for 2 hours because I have an engineering background. That said, during my 4 years working at an actual aerospace company, I've never once heard anyone say,
"I've done the math. Checks out."
From a thematic standpoint, The Martian focuses on 2 ideas. 1, collaboration. It's just a lot of very smart people working together towards a common goal. The people at NASA headquarters, the engineers at the Jet Propulsion Lab, Watney on Mars, the rest of the crew in the Hermes. And just as is the case in Brooklyn, there's really no antagonist. Everyone wants the same thing, and while they may have disagreements on how to best go about it, the central conflict is inherent to the situation, not between the characters. The second theme is keeping a positive attitude in the face of overwhelming odds. Now, let me back up and remind people that The Martian raised some eyebrows at the Golden Globes when it competed in the comedy category rather than the drama category. Many saw it as shameless category fraud on the part of the studio, misrepresenting the movie so that it has a better chance of winning against softer competition. And by the way, it worked.
Comedy?
And no, I wouldn't call it a comedy, but it definitely has comedy sensibilities. What I mean by that is, yes, it certainly has some very funny moments, and very dramatic moments, but more importantly, Watney, and therefore the movie, never truly despairs. Almost as if to spite his circumstances, he mostly stays positive and cracks light. At worst, he looks at his situation and says, well, shit.
You, Mars.
So, I would say that The Martian has a story that indicates drama, but a tone that indicates comedy, if that makes sense. Actually, The Big Short kind of plays in the same sandbox. If that sounds tonally inconsistent to you, you're not wrong. It shouldn't work, but it does. And if nothing else, The Martian is a really fun movie. And yes, it's fairly ironic that the Best Picture nominee with possibly the most dire circumstances, direst, is also the one that's the most fun. But I think that's the main takeaway. No matter how bad things may seem, you can get through it with the right attitude and the right support system. NASA's a good one. As far as big budget sci-fi blockbusters go, it's phenomenal. Smart, funny, thrilling. As far as Oscar movies go, judging it against the culture-defining best movies of the year, it's okay. And that's fine. It's not like the movie tried and failed to be an Oscar-y movie that people were still talking about weeks later. I think The Martian is exactly what it tried to be. And while it's not impossible to be both a thrilling blockbuster and one of the culture-defining best movies of the year, it's perfectly okay to be one and not the other. My personal taste tend to skew towards smaller movies, so if it were up to me, the Best Picture nomination probably would have gone elsewhere. But that said, I understand the Academy's desire to nominate higher-profile movies to get a larger audience to care about the Oscars. As far as blockbusters go, they could do a lot worse than The Martian. Need to catch up on all the Oscar-nominated movies? Watch them with Movies on Demand from the comfort of your home through your local cable provider. Go to rentmoviesondemand.com for more information. And while you're at it, you can win free Movies on Demand if you can predict the Oscars. Go to mod.moviesondemandpool.com and use the pool login information in the description below to join my personal Oscar prediction pool. But to win, you have to beat me. Good luck and happy Oscar season.